Welcome back to another deep dive on The Explainer. Look, I am so incredibly pumped for today's episode because we have an absolutely fascinating explainer lined up for you. We are going to be unpacking some truly incredible archival insights that give us a literal front row seat into the mind of one of the most prolific, dissected, and influential artists of our entire generation. Taylor Swift. But we aren't just doing a general overview today. No, we are looking at a very specific high-stakes snapshot in time. We're zeroing in on that exact precipice of a massive, unprecedented career shift. We're going to analyze her totally candid thoughts on the immense weight of global fame, the suffocating reality of media scrutiny, and the highly deliberate, brilliant creative choices behind her pivot from her safe, established country roots into full-blown, undeniable pop dominance. Let me tell you, it is exceedingly rare to get such an unfiltered, real-time look at how a megastar actively constructs their public persona while simultaneously fighting tooth and nail to protect their own core authenticity. We are going to break down the actual mechanics of the pop star persona, pulling directly from her own words. We want to understand exactly how she views her art, how she views her fiercely loyal fans, and how she handles a media apparatus that literally watches her every single move. This is going to be incredibly insightful, whether you are a massive, diehard fan who knows every lyric, or just someone who is genuinely fascinated by the crazy intersection of media, business, and celebrity culture. So get comfortable because there is a lot to unpack here. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is the thematic roadmap for today's explainer, just to give you an idea of where we're heading. We've broken this entire analysis down into 4 specific sections. First up, we have the perfect human myth. Second, we're tackling the songwriting double standard. Third, transitioning to pop music. And finally, we will wrap up with friendship and fandom. All right, let's get right into our very first topic.
Section 1. The perfect human myth. Finding flaws in a clean image. Let's see how she navigates this.
Now, one of the most recurring themes you'll see with megastardom in almost any era is the media's relentless urge to build a celebrity up, put them on this towering, untouchable pedestal, just to inevitably try and knock them right back down. In our source material, there's this wild moment where the interviewer actually tells Swift that if Earth had to send someone to represent all of humanity to an alien race, she'd be the quote-unquote perfect human. And then almost immediately, the interviewer basically begs her to reveal a major flaw just to make everyone else in the world feel a little bit better about themselves. So how does she respond to this trap? She completely, expertly rejects the entire perfect supermodel narrative. She doesn't take the bait. Instead, she counters by describing herself as an edgy mess, who is, in her own exact words, all over the place. And then she drops this incredibly grounded truth bomb. She admits that she is essentially a massive shut-in. She says, "I'm sort of a shut-in and just watch TV by myself with my cats all the time." I mean, think about that contrast. Instead of giving them a scandalous, glamorous flaw, like partying too hard or having wild diva demands, she offers up this profoundly mundane isolation to completely puncture their mythological view of her. She makes it crystal clear that when she isn't doing these high-pressure, high-profile interviews or performing massive sold-out stadium shows for tens of thousands of people, she isn't out living some glamorous, untethered, Gatsby-esque lifestyle. She points out that people are constantly, desperately searching for flaws in her armor. But the ultimate flaw she offers, the only thing she'll give them to satisfy that media craving for juicy imperfection, is simply the fact that she is a massive homebody who just wants to hang out on her couch.
And this actually builds into a genuinely funny, super relatable narrative. As she's discussing spending all of her precious free time essentially isolating with her cats, the interviewer naturally goes for the classic, slightly teasing question: is she destined to become the stereotypical crazy cat lady? She pushes back, insisting she is going to keep it cute, and reveals she currently has 2 cats at that moment. But then we get into the literal mathematics of pet ownership, and her delivery here is fantastic. She notes that even with just 2 cats, she already feels completely surrounded. She's saying, there's one over there, there's one over here, they're just everywhere in the house. She admits that if she added even one more, making it a total of 3, she feels it would officially become a herd or a pack. And then she establishes a very firm, highly specific numerical boundary for herself. The number 4. She declares with absolute certainty that if you have 4 cats, you have officially crossed the threshold and bought a one-way ticket entirely into Crazy Cat Lady Town. But because she's quick on her feet, she does offer one single crucial loophole to this hard rule. The only acceptable exception to the 4-cat threshold is if you are actively rescuing and fostering them. This whole exchange is just brilliant. It really showcases her self-deprecating humor. She takes the media's invasive demand for a scandalous flaw and totally flips it, turning it into a comedic, deeply normal conversation about the exact mathematical threshold of feline ownership. And just as a super funny aside from the source, when she's asked if the same strict numerical threshold applies to having children, she emphatically says, absolutely not, noting you can have as many kids as you want without hitting a crazy threshold.
Still on the topic of humanizing this massive, larger-than-life pop star, the interviewer brings up another really interesting angle on this whole concept of perfection. They ask if there's a skill out there that she completely lacks but desperately wishes she had. Now think about who we are talking about here. Despite her immense wealth, her unparalleled global influence, and a level of worldliness that most people won't achieve in a lifetime, especially at such a young age, her answer is remarkably, almost surprisingly grounded. She states that if she could simply push a magic button and instantly be able to do something really well, without the effort, she would choose to speak fluent French and fluent Spanish. That's it. The interviewer, obviously a bit surprised by how normal this is, points out that she could easily just hire a tutor and learn this. But she totally acknowledges she just hasn't done it, chalking it up to simply not having put in the time. What is particularly amusing about this part of the conversation is the interviewer jokingly reminding her that as she is fast approaching 25 years old, her brain development isn't exactly speeding up anymore. It's a very candid, very humanizing moment in the interview. Here's an artist who commands international stages, who controls vast aspects of the music industry, yet the one unattainable thing she wishes she could just instantly magically acquire is the ability to easily converse in a few extra languages. It's just a great, sobering reminder that no matter how elevated or untouchable a public figure seems from the outside, they still have those exact same grounded, everyday aspirations and to-do list items that they just haven't gotten around to yet, just like the rest of us. All right, moving on to Section 2, the Songwriting Double Standard. We're going to look at artistic integrity versus media scrutiny. As we shift our focus away from the personal myths the media creates, we have to take a hard look at the professional reality of her art. Now, we all know the defining characteristic of her music, from day one, has always been deeply personal, hyper-specific, narrative-driven storytelling. But here is the catch. As her fame grew astronomically, taking over the globe, that very same honest songwriting process that made her famous became the subject of intense, relentless, and often totally unfair media scrutiny. The absolute primary criticism she constantly faces, the one you hear over and over, is that she writes entirely about her ex-boyfriends and her dramatic love life. When she's confronted with this critique, she poses a remarkably simple yet totally profound rhetorical question. She just asks, "What else are you meant to write about?" And honestly, it's a fantastic point. She explains her career trajectory very clearly to make it make sense. She reminds everyone that her core fans have been keeping up with her music since way before she was a household name. Remember, her very first album came out when she was just 16 years old, a literal teenager. At that time, it was entirely natural, expected even, for her to write about her life exactly as she saw it and exactly as she felt it. But then, she got incredibly successful, and exponentially more people started paying attention to her every move. The truly fascinating thing she points out here is that her creative method never actually changed. She didn't pivot her style. The only thing that changed was the sheer size and the perspective of the audience listening. Suddenly, the broader public and the tabloid media began using her autobiographical songs not as beautiful pieces of art to be consumed and related to, but as literal clues to play detective with. They took the raw, honest expression of a dedicated songwriter and weaponized it, turning it into a cheap tabloid guessing game. If her entire life is public, and her core human experiences revolve around connection, love, and heartbreak, what else is she supposed to draw her inspiration from? As the interviewer rightly points out during this exchange, if she isn't writing about love and personal relationships, what is she going to write about? Nightclubs? The tax code? It just doesn't make sense to ask a confessional songwriter to stop confessing.
And this brings us to a quote that just brilliantly illustrates her core philosophy as an artist. She states, clear as day, "The most important thing for me is maintaining artistic integrity, which means, as a songwriter, I still continue to write about my life." This is where she draws a very hard, non-negotiable line in the sand regarding her creative process. She has a strict, unwavering personal policy that she never, ever names actual names in her songs. Because of that rule, anyone, be it a fan, a blogger, or a major news outlet, who claims a specific song is definitively about a specific famous person is purely 100% speculating. She knows perfectly well that people are always going to do that. It's human nature at this point. But she absolutely refuses to let that outside speculation alter how she makes her art. She openly admits that she could very easily take the safe, easy route. She could totally water down her lyrics to protect herself. She could easily churn out generic pop songs about how the sky is blue and we're all dancing in a crowded club and everything is just great and meaningless. She even acknowledges that those types of songs have their place, they can be massive #1 hits, and she even likes listening to them herself. But she firmly believes that audiences are smart. People can sense real honesty. Audiences can actually hear the depth from which an artist approaches a song. They recognize real, lived emotions, and they know instinctively that true vulnerability is valuable, rare, and real. For her, compromising that raw honesty just to avoid some annoying tabloid rumors would mean sacrificing the very artistic integrity that connects her so deeply to her fans in the first place. She just refuses to sever that connection for the sake of good PR.
So the really crucial point here is how she critically views the actual nature of this specific criticism against her. She impartially observes that while she fiercely values her own emotional honesty, there is always going to be this loud, vocal contingent of people who try to dismiss her entire body of work by casually saying, "Oh, she just writes songs about her ex-boyfriends." And she doesn't shy away from this. She calls this out very directly, stating that, frankly, it is a very sexist angle to take. And she backs this up by illustrating a brilliant, undeniable point, drawing a direct comparison to her male contemporaries working in the exact same industry. She points to immensely successful male artists, specifically calling out guys like Ed Sheeran and Bruno Mars. She notes that these guys are absolutely, undeniably writing songs about their exes, their current girlfriends, and the intimate details of their love lives. It's the bread and butter of their catalogs, too. Yet no one ever says they are just writing about their exes as a means to diminish or dismiss their talent. No one in the media raises a red flag or plays aggressive detective with their lyrics in the same obsessive, hypercritical way they do with her. By laying out this direct side-by-side comparison, she highlights a stark, uncomfortable double standard in how the media evaluates the artistic validity of male versus female songwriters. They are both drawing from the exact same well of personal romantic experience, but only one is being penalized for it. It's a really powerful observation that forces the viewer to rethink how we consume media narratives about female artists.
Let's transition to Section 3, transitioning to pop music, the making of a new era. This is where things get really dynamic.
Armed with this fierce, battle-tested dedication to her artistic integrity, she made a truly monumental, incredibly risky decision regarding her musical direction. Up until this specific point in her career, everything she had ever released, everything that built her empire, was safely categorized under the label of country music. But for this specific project, she decided to shed the country label entirely, leave that safety net behind, and create her very first official, unabashed pop album. Now, the foundation of this massive new pop sound wasn't just some clinical boardroom decision made by men in suits to maximize profits. It was deeply, fundamentally rooted in major shifts happening in her actual personal life. She explains that emotionally, this entire new album comes from a place of significantly more independence and freedom than she had ever felt before. And what was the catalyst for this massive emotional shift? Moving to New York City and finally living her life entirely on her own terms. I want you to really think about what that actually means for a second. You have an artist whose entire early career was completely defined by teenage experiences, high school heartbreak, and growing up in the public eye. Now she is stepping into her mid-20s, she's relocating to one of the most vibrant, chaotic, and inspiring cities in the entire world, and she is embracing total, unapologetic autonomy. That immense feeling of personal liberation and that massive geographical shift fundamentally altered her internal emotional landscape. And because we already established in the last section that her artistic integrity relies entirely on writing about her actual life, this newfound independence in New York City naturally and inevitably became the beating emotional core of her very first pop album. The life shift dictated the genre shift, not the other way around. To truly bring this new feeling of total independence to life, she didn't just walk into a studio and write a few new songs. She meticulously, deliberately crafted an entire immersive aesthetic universe for this era. She explains her approach to album making as a serious, long-term endeavor, stating that she works intensely on an album for 2 solid years. Because she spends so much of her life living entirely inside that specific creative space, she loves to develop distinct visual and sonic themes to clearly define the era for herself and her fans. For this specific pop album, she outlines a very clear, highly curated mood board that guided everything. Visually, she focused heavily on a specific nostalgia. Polaroids, bright neon lights, and washed-out pastel colors. It was a very distinct vibe. Sonically, while making sure to maintain her signature razor-sharp storytelling-based lyrics, she shifted the musical production entirely. She drew massive, sweeping inspiration from the late 80s synth-pop era. She notes that, in her view, culturally and musically, a lot of really cool, boundary-pushing things were happening during that late 80s period, and she wanted to channel that exact electric energy into her new work. This right here is a brilliant textbook example of how a true pop star persona is constructed at the highest level. It's done by carefully aligning genuine personal emotional growth with highly specific, cohesive visual imagery and a distinct, instantly recognizable sonic palette. She actually describes the entire 2-year process of making this specific album not as a stressful chore, but as an absolute joy. You can really feel that she was completely in her element, building this new world from the ground up.
Moving into our final section, Section 4, Friendship and Fandom, Navigating Fame Together. As she confidently steps into this massive new, independent pop era, she isn't doing it in a vacuum or totally alone. She is constantly surrounded by peers who are experiencing the exact same surreal, isolating level of fame, and a dedicated fan base that has essentially grown up right alongside her. During this archival look, the interviewer asks her about a very specific dynamic, her relationship with a younger best friend who is also navigating the music industry. The interviewer astutely notes that Swift comes across as very strong, highly self-aware, and exceptionally good at handling the chaotic media circus, and asks her how she goes about protecting and helping her younger friend through those exact same crushing industry pressures. The background context here is absolutely fascinating. She notes they met when they were just 15 and 17 years old, and now, at the time of this interview, they are 22 and 24. That is 7 incredibly formative, crucial years of growing up together while living under a microscopic global lens. Her advice on how to be the best friend possible in this highly unique situation is incredibly mature and insightful. She says, never try to boss them around. Just be there for your friends, no matter what. She strongly emphasizes that, as a friend, you really have to learn when to take a step back and let people figure things out completely on their own, even if they stumble. She expresses a deep, profound trust in her friend's judgment, noting multiple times that she's incredibly intelligent. Instead of trying to aggressively dictate her friend's life choices or acting like an overbearing protector, she believes the absolute worst thing you can possibly do is be bossy. The best, most effective approach is to simply be a steady, unwavering presence, just offering solid support as they navigate the wild, unpredictable phases of fame together, while still being able to look back and laugh, reminiscing about old stories from when they first met as unknown teenagers.
Okay, now let's take a quick, highly entertaining detour that perfectly illustrates her much more unguarded, spontaneous, and humorous side during these long press tours. The interviewer randomly decides to test her knowledge of Australia by forcing her to play a trivia game all about the country's notoriously terrifying and dangerous wildlife. The goal of the game is simple. She has to guess which of 4 options is the least dangerous to handle. The options they give her are a blue-ringed octopus, a funnel web spider, a death adder, and an all-teen child, which the interviewer quickly assures her sounds innocuous but carries some level of jeopardy. Without missing a single beat, she confidently guesses the second option, the funnel web spider. She immediately follows up this guess by declaring to the room that she absolutely hates spiders. Well, the interviewer then gleefully, almost sadistically, informs her that the funnel web spider is actually the most deadly spider on the entire planet. They tell her that these things live right there in Sydney, and according to the host, if they bite you, there is no antidote. You don't just get sick, you're just instantly gone. The reaction she has to this is pure visceral panic. The polished media training completely drops. She starts repeatedly saying, "Oh God," genuinely freaked out, revealing that among all her other fears, she suffers from some very real arachnophobia. The interviewer then makes it worse by joking about having one right there in her pocket for her. It's just a completely hilarious, chaotic radio moment that totally breaks down the carefully polished pop star facade we just spent time analyzing and leaves her genuinely terrified of an imaginary spider in a random radio studio. It's a great reminder of the actual human being behind the massive brand.
Now, what's really fascinating about this next slide is how it showcases an unprecedented, almost totally unique connection to internet fan culture. Moving past her absolute terror of Australian wildlife, the interviewer pivots and brings up her incredibly deep integration into Tumblr culture at the time. They specifically mention a massive, sprawling internet inside joke known as "No, It's Becky." This refers to a viral moment where she was actually photographed out in public wearing a t-shirt bearing that exact absurd phrase, which originated from a totally random meme on the platform. When the interviewer asks if she actually knows about the joke, she doesn't just nod, she proudly declares, "I know all about it, I'm right across it." This is huge. She doesn't just passively observe her fandom from a safe, PR-approved distance, she actively, enthusiastically participates in their digital spaces. She learns their specific language, she tracks their inside jokes, and she physically adopts their memes into her real life. The interviewer then mentions an upcoming massive gathering in Hyde Park being organized entirely by our fans, which they have playfully dubbed a Swiftnik, literally a picnic for Taylor Swift fans. They actually gift her a custom t-shirt for the event right there in the studio, jokingly admitting it clearly doesn't fit her at all and she'll likely never wear it, to which she humorously fires back that she might actually wear it when applying her fake tan. She then goes on to call the entire Swiftnik concept total genius. This whole exchange perfectly demonstrates exactly how she dismantles the traditional rigid barrier between a megastar and their audience. By willingly wearing the "No, It's Becky" shirt in public and enthusiastically embracing fan-made concepts like the Swiftnik, she proves to her audience that she isn't just broadcasting music down to them from a mountaintop, she is genuinely in on the joke with them, cultivating an incredibly loyal, tightly knit community that feels seen and respected.
And that, my friends, brings us to the end of today's explainer.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've looked at exactly how she effortlessly swats away the impossible myth of the perfect human by fully embracing her inner, couch-bound cat lady. We've seen how she fiercely, logically defends her right to write autobiographical songs right in the face of blatant, sexist double standards. We dissected the meticulous, emotional, and visual world-building required to launch her very first true pop era. And we saw how she manages to ground herself through genuine, supportive friendships and a deeply reciprocal, inside joke-filled relationship with her fans. But honestly, looking at all of this archival evidence together leaves us with a lingering, much larger question to ponder as we wrap up. Based on the relentless, often crushing media pressure we've examined today, we really have to ask ourselves, does intense public scrutiny inevitably force artists to eventually compromise their honesty, constantly watering down their art just to avoid the wrath of the tabloids? Or can true, unwavering artistic integrity actually survive and maybe even thrive in the dead center of the blinding global spotlight? It is a truly fascinating tension between raw authenticity and manufactured fame, and this source material shows us exactly how one of the biggest stars in the history of the world chose to fight that exact battle. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. It's been an absolute blast to unpack this with you. I will see you on the next Explainer.